Remember, Jesus has just given the woes to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, exposing the hypocrisy of their religion. When Jesus went outside, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began to oppose him fiercely and to besiege him with questions, waiting to catch him in something he might say. Just think about that for a moment before we read on. Think about the environment Jesus is in. Every word he's saying, they're trying to trip him up with. There's this constant opposition, constant watching of him, and they're opposing him fiercely and besieging him with questions. That gives you something of the atmosphere. But then read on, 12 verse 1. Meanwhile, when a crowd of many thousands had gathered, so that they were trampling on one another. Again, so you've got the opposition of the Pharisees, but you've just got the swamping of the people to the point where it's out of control. This is not a nice public stadium where you buy tickets and it's all ordered. This is just crowds gathering and wanting to get to the front to listen to Jesus, and it's a bit chaos, trampling on one another. And this is the situation Jesus is ministering in. Carry on, verse 1. Jesus began to speak first to his disciples, saying, "Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs." Just pause there. He's speaking to the disciples here. He's warning them about the Pharisees, who have this kind of whispering campaign unofficially against Jesus and speaking ill of him. It's now breaking out into hatred. All that's going on in their plots is all going to be exposed, is all going to be made known to God. But actually, it's to the disciples that Jesus is saying this. To those who are following him, there's going to be nothing concealed that will not be disclosed. Folks, that ought to bring a measure of fear to us. Nothing's hidden from God. There is going to be a day of great disclosure. That should act as a restraint, as well as a challenge to our hearts and how we stand before God. And if you're not frightened by that, I tentatively want to suggest there's something wrong with you. I know what's in here, and I don't want that disclosed. So just hold on to that powerful statement in verse 2 and verse 3. But then he goes on to say this in verse 4. "I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that can do no more. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after your body has been killed, has authority to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him." Let's just unpick that for a second before we read on. So there's the opposition of the Jews, the Pharisees, fiercely opposed to Jesus, watching every word. He knows that they're going to put him to death, and he's saying to his disciples that will go on, and there'll be those who will want to threaten your lives, but don't fear them, because all they can do is kill the body. Now, that to us sounds horrific. What do you mean all they can do to you is kill your body? That sounds terrible, but Jesus is making us aware that there's a far worse fate than physical death. Painful though that might be, it is temporary, it is short-lived, that experience. Actually fear the one who can cast you into hell, has the authority to throw you into hell. Now put that with the statement that's just been said before about all that's said in secret being exposed. That ought to add an extra element of worry, oughtn't it, to the fear of the sin in our hearts, that this is the fate. We deserve condemnation. In seeking to follow Jesus, we might find ourselves facing opposition. Why is Jesus saying these things to his disciples at this moment? Perhaps to help them put the persecution and opposition into perspective, that it's not their biggest problem. But I think also to bring them the greatest comfort. Now read on in verse 6 and 7. "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." Wow. So the one who knows the greatest depths of our hearts and has the authority to throw us into hell, and frankly ought to. Does that make sense? The wages of sin is death. That death actually commands us not to be afraid, because he loves us so much that he knows how many hairs are on our head, and we're worth more than the sparrows, of whom he notices every one that falls. And so Jesus is talking about being afraid of God on one hand, and then that God saying, don't be afraid. And that package then leads into the conclusion of verse 8. I tell you, whoever publicly acknowledges me before others, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. So with all that in prospect, knowing what's in your heart and where you deserve to go, but the God who has authority to put you there has loved you and is saying, don't be afraid. Therefore, we can have the confidence not to be afraid of those who can only touch the body, to publicly declare Christ before them. But again, encouragement flips into warning straight away. Verse 9, whoever disowns me before others will be disowned before the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. So we go from the encouragement of don't fear. God knows the intimate details of your lives. He cares for you. And be encouraged that when you speak for Jesus, remember that he's going to be speaking for you on that final day, when actually the secrets are exposed and the outcome which we deserve is not going to happen, because he's speaking for us. Therefore, speak for him. But beware, you disown him now. And I don't think that means in the odd slip. We see Jesus' grace to Peter in restoring him after a very public disowning of Jesus. But if you choose to disown Jesus and walk in that, deliberately turning away from him, he is not going to stand for you on that final day. And then in verse 11, when you are brought before synagogues, rulers and authorities, do not worry about how you'll defend yourselves or what you'll say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you at that time what you should say. So again, don't worry, don't fear. Don't be planning your defense before it happens. Don't be so worried about the opposition of the Pharisees and their hatred. Don't worry about them being able to take your life. Actually, even when you're on trial, the Holy Spirit will teach you. He'll give you the words, even through the midst of that trial. So yet again, in this run of teachings of Jesus, which are worded so strongly and are so stark, and when you dwell on them, they're like, this is big stuff. Actually, there's important stuff for us to weigh here. We need to hear the warnings, because they flesh out, they make the encouragements all the greater.